Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Dr. Tech Show, where myself, Pauline, Roche, and Swain Hunter, and occasional guests guide you through the world of online communications in this show, which is the brainchild of the late John Popham. We're pre-recording this show, so we'll see how it goes. So the first part of the show should be the music, so let's try and play that. And it's always good to hear the motion, the theme tune, which is called Motion Sickness, chosen by John when we started John Popham, who started the show, as I said earlier, who chose the music when we started the show in May of this year. So our first question usually for the early part of the show is how's the weather where you are. So I'll ask myself and I'll ask our special guest, Kate Gordon, when she joins us shortly. So the weather where I am, when I asked Alexa this morning, the weather was 2 degrees, which seemed very cold, especially when I asked her also about the weather in Galway, where my mum lives, where it was 7. So it seemed very, very cold this morning. But it was warm enough for a walk. We went out for a walk, and the sun was really kind of shining brightly in our eyes. So it was nice to have a walk around the local park and enjoy the weather as it is today. So today we're celebrating, we're celebrating the fact that we're still doing Dr. Tech Show, and we have a couple of events coming up that celebrate things that we like to mark at the beginning of the show every week. So the 25th, which is Wednesday this week, is International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And in December 1999, the United Nations General Assembly designated this day as the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and it marks the beginning of 16 days of remembrance and activism, culminating in International Human Rights Day. According to a report by the United Nations, 19% of women between the ages of 15 and 49 years of age have experienced physical and/or sexual violence by an intimate partner, and in some cases this violence sadly ends in the woman's death. The 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence is an international campaign that takes place every year, commencing, as we said, on the 25th and going on to the 10th of December with Human Rights Day, indicating that violence against women is the most pervasive breach of human rights worldwide. It was originated by activists at the inaugural Women's Global Leadership Institute in 1991, and continues to be coordinated each year by the Centre for Women's Global Leadership, and it's used as an organizing strategy by individuals, institutions, and organizations around the world to call for the prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls. We also, Swain actually also picked up that on the 30th of November is Remembrance Day for Lost Species, and that fact will take us up to next Monday, but I think we'll still cover it today. And this has its own website, and I will go to the website and then see if I can share it on my screen. So let's do that now. The websites don't always open as quickly as you'd like them to. Let's have another look. And there it is now. So I'm sharing my screen, and you can see this is a Remembrance Day for Lost Species. A chance each year to explore the stories of extinct and critically endangered species, cultures, lifeways, and ecological communities. While emphasizing that these losses are rooted in violent and discriminatory governing practices, this day provides an opportunity for participants to make or renew commitments to all who remain and to develop creative and practical solutions. And the day honors diverse experiences and practices associated with enduring and witnessing the loss of cultural and biological diversity. And it offers an annual theme, usually an annual theme to provide inspiration. And when I looked at the annual theme this year, it in fact said that they weren't organising a specific day, a specific theme this year, but they do have a suggestion. But a bit more about the day. It was co-founded by Feral Theatre and the Life Cairn in 2011 and is supported by a range of organisations and practitioners. It has no legal structure and is volunteer-led. And the project admin is mainly carried out by ONCA staff and volunteers in the UK. That's an arts charity that bridges social and environmental justice issues. And by Extinction Witness in the UK, which is a global arts project of empowerment works that supports the human grieving process and the revival of compassionate lifeways. So it's a chance each year to explore the stories of extinct and critically endangered species, cultures, lifeways, and ecological communities. While emphasising that these losses are rooted in violent and discriminatory governing practices, the day provides an opportunity for participants to make or renew commitments to all who remain and develop creative and practical solutions. So in 2020, organisers are invited, if they wish, to use this year's commemoration of the day as an opportunity to explore the ways in which white supremacy has shaped their organising spaces and thinking, and to consider how their work can or does contribute to and strengthen the growth of the intersectional environmental movement. One suggestion is to consider accessibility and inclusion. And, obviously on a program like this, we're all about inclusion. And there are some suggestions that you could use in organising any event. So the suggestions are to work actively to amplify the perspectives of people affected by the drivers of extinction. Simplistic storytelling that reinforces frames that other and exclude can be a kind of violence. So can you make the event feel safe or safer and accessible for all prospective participants? Think about who's organising the event, who's invited, how's the event being promoted, whose voices and stories will be heard, and whose memories will be shared. All great suggestions for organising any kind of event in these days when we're all trying to be more egalitarian and to look for equity, not just equality. So I'm looking forward to being joined today by our special guest. So let me tell you a bit about her before she joins us. Her name is Kate Gordon, and she combines a part-time post in a Chinese organization in Birmingham with freelance work supporting charities and the volunteering community organizations. She provides development support to third sector organizations on governance structures, organization policies, and employment practices and procedures. She also provides HR consultancy to social enterprises and micro businesses. She has experience in policy communications as well as event management. And she can deliver training on all aspects of employment law to any kind of group, advisors, workers, employers, and community or resident groups. And I'm now going to be joined by our very special guest, Kate Gordon, who's just entering from the waiting room. And Kate and I have known each other for some years, so it'll be good to have her on the show and good to hear what she's got to say. So welcome, Kate.
Hi, Pauline. Morning, afternoon.
Yeah. How are you doing today? Great. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So how are you today? We normally have a question at the beginning of the show to ask people how the weather is where they are. So how's the weather where you are?
It was quite bright, but I got off this morning and went for an early morning trot around the canal. I saw someone give a tip on Twitter the other day, which is at this time of year, go for a walk first thing before work, because obviously it gets dark early. So going for the walk first thing means you get to see some daylight.
So it's supposed to be very good for you. My family group and I were having a conversation about vitamins yesterday. My mother doesn't believe in them and says, get all your vitamins from fruit and veg and from daylight. But unfortunately, some of us can't do that. But I have heard that it's best to try, if you are going out, to try and go out before 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So yeah, good thing to do. So Kate, I've introduced you based on your LinkedIn profile. Well, this has been recorded, so if you'd like to introduce yourself a bit more and say a bit more about what you do, what you enjoy doing in your working life.
Okay. Am I here in a work capacity?
Well, to some extent, yeah.
Okay. I've worked in the voluntary sector for years, donkey's years, at all different levels actually. But currently I work at the Chinese Community Centre, so it's very sort of frontline, hands-on stuff, which is very good because I've also worked at regional infrastructure level, which has its own purposes, very good purposes, but you can feel very remote and cut off from what's actually happening. And I've also been a trustee, so it's just good to get those different perspectives.
Sure.
I find, particularly because
Yeah.
I also do freelancing, working with organisations to any sort of point of development, and I think it's really useful to actually be somebody who works in the sector to support other organisations.
Mm.
Sorry, have I answered your question?
How long have you actually worked in the sector, would you say? Yes, you have, yeah. How long would you say you've been doing this kind of work?
I've worked in the sector starting in '83, I think it was, in Birmingham CAB, when it was still in the old Colmore Circus subway.
Right, okay.
But I think the first volunteering I did was actually with the Birmingham Adult Literacy programme, when it was still in the, I think it was the Brass House Centre.
Mm.
So from there went into quite a typical path really, from volunteering. As a CAB volunteer, I became a CAB manager at Smethwick CAB, and then just moved onwards and onwards and sideways, not particularly upwards, but I don't think many people do actually. So yeah.
So so you and I have a similar career path, because I think my first paid job was in 1983 as well, in Ireland, and then I came to England in 1984. And we first met when you were working at the West Midlands Low Pay Unit.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was sort of second tier sort of infrastructure, but having said that, it was a research campaigning organisation, but it also did advice work and training, and I was the training officer. Training
So,
and information.
Yeah, looking back, I mean, I've done a presentation recently about the internet, and it's really hard for me to believe that it only started in the 1990s. You know, so we kind of knew of a time when you didn't have the internet, and where, you know, finding information and helping people communicate was all about telephones and faxes and face-to-face stuff. And obviously that's changed a lot more recently. But you know, looking back, can you remember the before time, before internet, and then what started to happen, and changes you've seen through the years?
I can remember all of that. Certainly CAB days were the old paper file system. So you literally had a cabinet, filing cabinet, that was full of these folders, and every month the national organisation would send through an update pack. Now, as a manager, a lot of people thought we were just being horribly cruel. But as a manager, with new volunteers, one of their tasks would be to work through that pack and physically update the system. We weren't being cruel. It actually meant that people understood the whole gamut of information that CAB deals with. I mean, it was a pretty thankless, boring task, because it was a literal cut and paste into the system, into the CPAG handbooks and the whole lot. But it meant that all of our volunteers knew the information system inside out, and even if they never got an inquiry on a particular thing, they knew it was there.
Yeah.
And one thing about information, I think, of course, everyone talks nowadays about computers and digital and blah blah blah. But for me, information is that's the key. It's getting across information in a way that people can understand, however you do it. And certainly in the Chinese community centre, we're dealing with some people, and obviously this is not unique to the Chinese community, it's just where I am, but we are dealing with some people who not only have low IT levels, literacy, but they also have just very low literacy levels.
Mm.
So, you know, when you're thinking about information, as I say, that the way that you get that across isn't always going to be through computers, IT. It may just be very simple posters. It may be verbal. It may have to be verbal.
Mm.
And I think some organisations can kind of forget the need to be very comprehensive still.
Yeah, it's we have talked about it on the show previously about the Centre for Better Aging. It's kind of Better Aging or something. I can't remember exactly the title of it, but we talked about a report they did about digital, and they very highly recommended that people didn't forget that some people don't have access to those channels, and to make sure that if digital services were being developed, that non-digital service should also be available alongside. And I think that's probably chimes with what you've been saying.
Mm.
So would you say that you you know, when would you say in your working life you really started to use the internet and digital services?
Okay, I can't remember a particular year, but I guess it would have been the 90s. When I went to work at the low pay unit, no, actually, when I was still at the CAB, I remember when we got our first computer, we had an old Amstrad, and we were like, you know, in Toy Story, those little creatures that are inside that toy machine, and
Yeah.
there's the thing, and they go ooh like this. You know, the Amstrad was given to us, and we kind of looked at it. It was just completely alien to us because we weren't given any training. It just kind of arrived, and we turned it on, and it kind of flickered. And basically, the only person who ever actually used it was our debt counsellor. So then I moved on to I jumped over the fence for about 18 months and went to work at the Regional Health Authority. And there I never touched a computer at all because there was still an old-fashioned typing pool. So anything that I wanted done, I had to send to the typing pool. So it's actually not till I went to work at the low pay unit. There was a little, is it dot matrix type thing in the corner? And again, access to the computers were very, very limited. The director had one, the researcher had one, and the administrator. But we advisors and training officers, we had to handwrite everything. Can you imagine? I wrote training manuals by hand. Had to hand them over to the secretary to type out for me. So it was only when there was a change of director with a different attitude towards staff having access to computers, that we actually started to literally touch the things. So it was a long time actually before I used a computer. I've got two now grown-up sons, so I did get a computer in the end, more with them in mind than myself initially. So yeah, I think I was quite late in coming to tech. As you know, Pauline, I'm very low tech.
Well, I think that it's common for you know, charities generally, certainly smaller charities, which I think is, even you're in my experience, you know, not to have the funding really to sometimes to pay for the you know, the equipment that we desperately need, and you know, it's amazing that small charities especially, again, have done so well and have helped so many people, considering the lack of kind of equipment and skills and so on. But there is also a cultural thing about the mindset that kind of explains to people that, you know, not being digital, certainly in this century, is not going to enable us to survive for very much longer. And I think with lockdown, excuse me, and the pandemic generally, it's, you know, it hasn't helped with the kind of risks to organizations. And I think, you know, it'd be interesting, although saddening to see of the organizations that are closing, what you know, what their lack of digital technology and transformation will have had, you know, to make that happen. So when would you say, you know, you really got into using the internet yourself and became aware of kind of a bigger world, or a, you know, a more connected world?
Um, well, it's been incremental. Probably when I went to work at the Regional Action West Midlands, I think, because there everybody had a computer on their desk. I think it was just, I guess a lot of it must be to do with who, you know, basically your chief exec and their attitude. And Sharon was a real techie. She's very pro tech. So it was just standard that everybody just worked straight to computer. There was no messing around, you know, writing stuff, you know, 5 million words, you know, using pencil and paper. But what I do remember about that actually was when I went for the job in the first place, and this was a reflection of the fact, I think, that the kind of information officer I had been, which was basically researching and producing information. So I went for this job, which was information officer, but it turned out to be, you know, the techie kind of information worker. And when I got there, they said, "Oh, you know, have you got your presentation?" And which I didn't have. I had a paper presentation. I had absolutely no idea how to do PowerPoints at that point. So anyway, I didn't get the job. The chair of the board sat there looking just really annoyed, and fed up. But in fact, they offered me a different job, which was the research officer. You know, some years later, we're having a discussion about you know, what that job had been about, because they're asking all sorts of questions, and I didn't even understand the questions about information, but that's because they had a totally different perspective of it. So as I say, it was standard daily use. Again, I wasn't becoming a techie. We had the techie bob, so I was still producing things like bulletins and so forth. But someone else was actually, you know, producing it in a whizzy kind of digital bulletin. I've never actually learned those kind of skills. And I think it's just, you know, you learn what you need to know.
Yeah. And would you say, as a trustee, that your awareness and your colleagues' awareness of digital has changed over time?
Quite possible. Although I'm not a trustee at the moment, and I'm not particularly searching for a trusteeship. If one comes up, it does. But you know, but I think as a trustee, again, from my perspective, what I wanted to know was, you know, what sort of issues were coming through the door. That sort of information. To some extent, I mean, I think there is a level to which the presentation does matter if it makes it more digestible. So, for example, for myself, I'll digest data if it's much more graphic than just screeds of figures. But other people can cope with, you know, pages full of figures. Then they can just see it and then translate it straight away. But it is about translating information into something that is meaningful. So trustees can then use that stuff to make decisions. Yeah.
And I've seen, speaking of translating, I've seen some of your work recently around COVID-19 and explaining, you know, using diagrams to explain the bubbles that people can be in and who can associate with who else. And I found them very useful, and I know other people have as well. And I know you kind of draw them by hand, and then somebody else, a colleague, you know, uses Canva to transform them into something that you're happy to share with other people. But it has been really, really valuable. And I think that comes from your kind of basic and grounded knowledge of interpreting information for people. Can you say a bit about that?
Yes, well, it does come back down, as I say, to people who really have no literacy in any language. So for them to just be able to see quite, simple visuals, which will just show, they can just look and see, yes, I can meet with one other person. They don't have to read it, they can just see it. But, I was just thinking actually back to CAB days when people would come through the door and say, oh, I'd like you to fill this form in because I've forgotten my glasses, which obviously made no sense whatsoever. But, people are afraid of, admitting that they can't read, or most people are. But they still need information, either information given to them or explained to them. That's a very sort of basic need that everybody has.
Yeah.
But the posters, they've been very effective, I think. Quite popular.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I haven't seen it done like that by anybody else. And as you know, I follow a lot of people online who write about digital and data especially. And I think being able to convey that information in that kind of with graphics has been really valuable for people. And I've shown other people that and they found it very useful. So since lockdown, kind of coming right up to kind of present time in this year, what changes have you had to make, either as an employee or as a consultant freelancer, around digital yourself, and what have you noticed other people? What changes have other people had to make?
Well, I've in reality, freelancing work. I'm actually just starting to pick some up, but has really been on hold because I work. Effectively, I work full time at the moment, so I haven't been promoting the freelance. Certainly within the centre, we've had to put stuff online. So and that has been challenging because we've again working with people. The majority of our members are in their 50s, right into their 90s, and there's a very high level of not illiteracy, not complete illiteracy, but the educational levels generally are not high. So to get people onto Zoom, which is what we've done, when they can't actually read the instructions, so we've had to translate. Again, we've had to produce screenshot guides in Chinese, and we've had support workers who've talked people through downloading the app, and so we've done a lot of work to get people onto Zoom. And it's been worth it because we've had people who've actually managed to sort out their own Zoom meetings with their own families, which is really great. And then the other platform that we use as an app is WeChat. So those are our two main ways of communicating directly with the Chinese community. We do have website, Facebook and Twitter. And actually over the years, we've noticeably picked up more Chinese followers, particularly on Facebook, because initially when we first set up our Facebook, it was mainly English people that were looking at it. But over the years, we've actually built up quite a big Chinese following. Although most of the stuff we put on there is in English. It's a different kind of audience, really. But so we've got a sort of a range of different platforms.
Can you explain a bit more about WeChat, because people who are watching or listening to the program won't necessarily be aware of it. Can you explain a bit what it is?
It's an app. I don't, because I don't speak Chinese myself. I don't actually use it. It's not on my phone. But it's an app, and people can do just about anything and everything with it. I think they get information, but they can. I think there's a way they can use it to do shopping and paying for stuff as well. So it's a pretty sort of rounded thing, and it's extremely popular in the Chinese community, Chinese diaspora.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you talk about the numbers of people that you're getting onto your Facebook and so on, in a recent guest was Cambola from Asiana Community Project, and they're doing a lot of their activities online now as well. And they were saying that for some of their exercise classes, particularly, they were getting up to 20,000 people across Birmingham tuning in. Would you say your numbers are similar to that?
They have been. I've looked at our analytics, and it seems fairly steady that we get people looking at our Facebook page from across the world, including Hong Kong, and it's not quite 24/7 usage. There's a dip for some reason every day between about 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. But then other than that, it's just fairly steady. And when we put out, I think it was the first support bubble poster we put out. It was literally that sort of 20-something thousand. So we get these peaks. Obviously, we have our troughs as well, but we have these peaks, which tends to be when we put out the visuals.
And how does that compare? How does that compare to previous coverage you would have had, or previous people looking at your page? What were the numbers like before?
To be honest, I hadn't really checked the analytics before this. A bit naughty, I know, but just pumping stuff out.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be a pretty good guess that we weren't getting those sort of figures before we were producing that sort of information.
Yeah.
The other one that got attention was a video that we made for CCG on the flu jab, and again that had, I can't remember the actual figures, but that was also up there, and that's because we didn't. I mean, we when we're doing stuff in translation, we have to do it in two languages, two dialects. So we do Cantonese and Mandarin. And for these flu jabs to be really effective, we wanted known people in the community, not famous people, just known people. So one of them is our she's our vice chair, but she's also in our dance group, and she's one of our longest established volunteers, and lots of people know her. So she was the face of our Cantonese flu jab video, and then one of our support workers did the Mandarin, and again he's pretty well known in the mainland Chinese community. He's part of the Chinese church. So to get that information across, you see a face that you recognise, you're going to watch the video.
Yeah, definitely. And so would you say that you've helped, or the centre has helped a lot of people, more people come online since the beginning of the year?
Certainly amongst some of the older people, people who just, I mean, they may have had phones, usually provided by their families. Families will get them, sometimes quite nice smartphones, but they really have been previously just using them for calls, not making the full capability. And so since we started getting people to Zoom, which was around about May, June, they've been using their phones to take part in Zoom activities.
And what tends to be the most popular activities?
We've had cooking sessions, particularly with our volunteers, which are great fun. Some people actually cook and some people just sit and watch.
Yeah.
We have karaoke. We've had one or two Tai Chi and breathing technique sessions, because most certainly older, middle-aged to older Chinese people are very interested in their health. So they will do exercise. I mean, certainly if you go to East Asian countries, you'll see big groups of older Chinese people in the parks and that, doing Tai Chi. So that's kind of nothing new to them.
Mm.
So what we've actually found is that, in fact, yes, we've been doing all this information. There is high compliance with the rules and things, and what we're trying to do actually is spending quite a bit of time encouraging people to just go to the doctor if there's anything else wrong with them, because they've been very worried about going out, worried about going to GPs and hospitals. So in fact, we're kind of the other side of the coin and saying, look, it is safe to go to the doctors, and it is safe to go to the hospital. So please go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's happening with the centre itself? Are people back at work, or how are they managing to deliver services?
Right. The centre itself is still closed to visitors at the moment. We have got 2 members of staff going in separately, once a week each, to just keep things ticking over. Other than that, all of our other activities have moved online, and we're doing outreach visits, telephone, weekly telephone calls to keep in touch with people, because we've still got a significant number of people who have landlines only, so they can't take part in the online stuff.
Mm-hmm. And have they been tempted to come online, or they're happy with what they've got?
I think they're mainly happy with how they are. We've obviously tried to encourage, but for some people it's just not going to happen.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you about WhatsApp, because that's been very popular with other community groups, setting up WhatsApp groups to do broadcasts and stuff like that. Does WeChat allow that, or does WhatsApp get used in the Chinese community as well?
We do have some groups that are using WhatsApp. We had, before lockdown, we had a table tennis group and badminton group, and apparently they communicate. They've got their own little WhatsApp group, so we've got a bit of a mixture. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's really it's great to hear what's going on, for you and the communities that you're working with. So you're welcome to stay with me while I look at some other stories, or if you have to go, that's fine as well. It's up to you. How are you fixed?
I'm afraid that I am at work. I'm working, so I'm not going to be able to stay, but thank you for the invitation.
Okay, it's really good to have you, Kate, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.
So thanks very much to Kate for coming on and talking about what's happening in the Chinese community in Birmingham. I'm sure that would be of interest to our listeners, especially those on Hope Radio in South Birmingham. So we'll press on with a few more stories that we have come across in the last week or so, or last couple of weeks really. And the first one is about mapping digital inclusion support from organisations across Lancashire and South Cumbria. And this was a map that I noticed. I'm going to share it on the screen, where somebody, Linda Vernon on Twitter, is asking people to respond to her to map digital inclusion support from organisations across what's called Healthier Lancashire, Healthier LSC, Healthier Lancashire and South Cumbria, which is the name of the shared vision for improving services and helping the 1.8 million residents in the area live longer, healthier lives. So she's asking people from the public sector or from the voluntary community sector who are supporting people with digital skills or digital literacy support to please get in touch. This graph here that I'm just, or kind of picture that I'm just putting up now. And on a, especially for our listeners on Hope Radio, I'm going to read out what it says on the screen. And there are 4 boxes side by side with an arrow going across them, and the kind of identifying the need runs across them, all the 4 boxes. And so it goes from device accessibility through connectivity, digital activation, brackets, knowledge, skills, confidence, and to digital health literacy, that is ease of access and an understanding of digital health resources. So it's important to, I think, they recognise all of these things need to be in place for play. Identify the need through existing statistics and data sets from Ofcom, ONS, Citizens Online and Acorn, and emerging data sources, which they call SNOMED codes and social data. So the enablers for device accessibility are device loan schemes and personal health budgets. For connectivity, the enablers are prepaid data packages and improved public Wi-Fi. For digital activation, the enablers are collaboration, which are skills partnership, libraries, adult learning, the volunteering community, further education sector, volunteers and campaigns. And the enablers for digital health literacy are simplifying the front door and digital prescribing. And it gives a whole list of web links underneath as well. So I think that's a very useful diagram to have in any part of the UK. I think would find that useful to map their need in that way. So I hope that Linda has had responses. I can see some of them underneath there, including from some people I know, Lancashire Women. Liz Islam is a lady there that I've met before, and so there are some other responses. So I'm sure that's gone well, and it's been a good thing to try and map. As I say, I think other regions could find that useful and helpful as well. And so our next story was, as so many of our stories have been since we started the Dr. Tech Show, or a lot of them, Scottish Council of Volunteer Organisation have talked a lot about digital inclusion, and they have been doing kind of maps and guidance about what to use on the internet. And I'll share my screen so people can see the kind of thing that they talk about. So they have digital how-to guides on their website, and this is just kind of generally reminding people that the internet keeps us connected and allows us to learn, work, shop, and access public services. As some of the things that people can do. And it's trying to help other organizations who are planning digital inclusion support, who want to make it part of their service. They have guides, and they have for some very useful headlines here that can help people plan, because I think it can sometimes feel like it's a bit of a minefield, and what do you do, where do you start? So having a list like this is very helpful. So they have sections on user insight, on approach, on creating the culture. As we said before many times on the show, it's a lot of it is about the culture of recognizing the importance of digital and wanting to use it to its best advantage for the people we're working with. Digital champions, again, a topic we've covered many times on the show. It's good to see there are other programs besides the Digital Unite one, which has been brilliant. And that's spreading its way around the country. Promoting your service. I often say that for small organizations, if some money could be spent on communicating and marketing what they do, to let other people know what they're doing, the wonderful work that they're doing, it will be really helpful. So it's great to see some more of that happening and being promoted. And last but not least, evaluating success, because as we all know, applying for funding to spread our programs and reach even more people, we need good evaluations and monitoring to measure what's been successful and what hasn't. And if more projects were able to not just try things out, but to fail and then to see what doesn't work as well as it does work, it might be very useful. And there's a quote there from the Govan Housing Association saying, "We've always seen digital inclusion as part of our wider community inclusion programme. Digital is only one aspect of life, and we wanted to provide a holistic approach to inclusion." So it's good, again, to see that reflected. As we've said before, digital isn't the only thing, but it is one of the things that really helps in situations like we are in at the moment. So the next story was about digital communities in Wales, and as in other parts of the UK, Wales is one of the areas where they are also looking at supporting people more during the pandemic, and using digital is one of the ways of doing that. So again, I'll share my screen, showing this is Digital Communities Wales. It's called Digital Confidence, Health and Wellbeing. And it has a whole range of resources about supporting people during the COVID-19 pandemic, support for care homes, how we can help during COVID-19, and digital inclusion webinars. It gives you some data on the fact that 10% of adults in Wales are not online, which is, I think, is reflected in the rest of the UK. So there are ways of addressing that and trying to make it change that situation. They also supply case studies, and it's useful to see stories about what Digital Community Wales is doing. Lending Kit, as you see in the first story there, having a significant impact on mental health services for older people. A story about a school, St. Julian's Primary School, which is running a digital leaders program to support its most digitally engaged pupils. It's good to see kind of early adopters being encouraged to support other people. And I've run sessions on digital leadership myself at other events, and basically said if someone sees themselves as a digital leader, if they come to a digital leadership session, they're a digital leader. So it's good to support that. And another story there is an R in Bevan University Health Board offering digital tools to tackle isolation and loneliness. So there are many ways to follow and find out more about what's happening in Wales, including on Twitter. Their Twitter account is at DC_Wales. So if you want to find more about that, then please do follow that Twitter feed. And our next story goes back to Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations, and they've actually teamed up with GK College, a local further education provider, to develop a credit-rated certificate in digital inclusion support, SEQF level 4. And that sounds really interesting. I think a lot of us would, are enjoying what we're doing online, and it'd be nice to get a qualification in what they're doing. So this is Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations and Glasgow Kelvin College. And again, I'll share my screen so you can see what it looks like on the screen. So they have announced the release of a SCQF related courses designed to support local people to get online and take measures to address the digital skills gap in Scotland. And this course was co-designed by representatives and members of SCVO working with staff from the college. They're online and they're free, and there are no entry requirements other than having strong interest in digital inclusion. And I think most of us have that at the moment, these days anyway. So it's they say it's perfect for digital champions to help learners understand what is meant by digital inclusion, how it affects people who do not have digital skills, and what steps can be taken to support those considered digitally excluded. And it provides a theory-based approach explaining the reasons why people engage with digital technology, and more important, why others do not. And that's approximately 10 hours. And I think it's for Scottish people based in Scotland only, but it might be a model for others to use from, learn from. They're also offering essential skills for digital champions and digital inclusion project management. So it sounds like there's even more opportunities to do more learning in this field, and I'm sure we'll see more people taking advantage of that as time goes on. I'll cover one more story because we're kind of going to be running out of time shortly. This story is about devices, which we have covered a fair amount in this on these shows. And this is a story entitled "Community Calling Launches Phase 2 and Goes Nationwide." And this is about repurposing, reusing devices that aren't being used by people if they've stopped, they've got other new devices, so they don't have to use these old devices anymore, but they can be useful to other people. And this was following on from another scheme where people were already helped to use devices and be given devices. It was a pilot in the London Borough of Southwark, providing a lifeline for over 500 households struggling with the impact of COVID-19. So building on that project, it's going to be extended to the London boroughs of Lambeth, Lewisham and Southwark, which are locations with high levels of inequality, poverty, exclusion, and employment challenges. And then a national rollout will follow in Manchester, Bristol, Leeds, South Wales, and Glasgow, with a campaign targeting cities either facing or at risk of Tier 3 lockdown restrictions, and the full rollout to be completed by spring 2021. So it's a project announced by Hubbub and O2, and that was on the 28th of October. And they're asking for people and businesses to gift their old smartphones, and these devices will then be professionally data wiped, sterilized, and loaded with 12 months of free O2 Connect connectivity before being donated to digitally excluded people in cities facing or at risk of facing Tier 3 lockdown restrictions. And again, it kind of revisits the what we know, that 2.7 million UK adults were unable to access the internet in the 3 months before August. And so this should help with the isolation that's happening, the separation from social contact, and the reducing growing levels of electronic waste. So the story is a call out to include businesses and the public, and businesses can either donate business-owned devices that are no longer in use or engage employees by encouraging them to donate old phones they might have lying around at home. And supporting community calling is a great way for business to give back to the community. And it's great to hear that O2 are donating 12 months of free connectivity to beneficiaries to include unlimited minutes, unlimited text, and 6 gig of data per month for a full year. Now, that's great. It's a really generous offer. I think people need to be mindful that an hour on Zoom uses about 1 gig of data. So they'll need to use their data wisely. But if they don't use it all on Zoom, you can get lots of emailing and searching online and connecting using other video platforms as well, for 6 gig months. And there'll also be digital skills training at local support centres or remotely, equipping people with the knowledge and tools to thrive in the longer term. And O2 and Hubbub are going to be working with local community groups in each city to identify those most in need of a smartphone. So that's really beneficial and really good to hear happening. So I think we're going to be drawing the program to an end. I'm not quite sure when this is going to go out, but it's great to have had our guest, Kate Gordon, and to keep running the Dr. Tech Show and Tech Talk on Hope Radio. And we hope you have learned something, and look forward to seeing you on a future show. And so I will close by playing the music again, if I can get back to it. It's, again, as we said before, Motion Sickness, on which John Popham downloaded and encouraged us to have a theme. So it's really good to hear that music. Here we go.